when the sea first carried the aroma. On a morning so slow that time seemed reluctant to move forward, the Nusantara Sea revealed itself in its softest form. The small waves coming from afar no longer looked like moving water, but like thin sheets of cloth brushed by the last night wind. A soft mist hung low, so low it almost touched the water's surface, covering the boundary between sky and sea like a thin curtain not yet fully opened. The first sunlight did not dare to pierce the mist directly, but crept slowly like someone walking on a bamboo floor without wanting to make a sound. But wait, tell me where you are listening to this story, in what situation, and with what feeling. Write it in the comments column, and don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so I know you like the stories I give. Let's continue into the story this time. On the beach of a small island that did not yet have a name to the wider world, a boy sat on the cold sand, hugging his knees while looking at the barely visible waterline. He was not waiting for anyone. He was not waiting for a ship. He was not waiting for a new wind. He only sat because every morning the sea always invited him to speak in a language unknown to adults. There was a rhythm in the sound of the water coming in and out, a rhythm that was never the same every day, but always brought a calmness that made the boy feel he was listening to something very old. As he took a slow breath, a subtle scent was smelled, a scent that shouldn't be on a morning beach like this. The scent appeared so weak, as if coming from a dream, warm, sweet, spicy, very thin but having a presence. The boy did not know that what he inhaled was the aroma of cloves carried by the wind from the direction of the distant islands in the east. In the future, this spice would make nations go to war, would make world maps change, would make kingdoms rise and fall. But this morning, that aroma was just a soft whisper touching the tip of a village boy's nose. He closed his eyes, trying to catch the aroma more clearly. The smell of sea salt remained dominant, the usual smell, sticking to the skin and clothes of every coastal child. But behind it was something that did not come from the sea. Something that came from the soil and trees growing far from here. The aroma was so smooth, so light, that only someone truly silent would notice it. And the boy, sitting alone with no purpose other than feeling the sea's existence, heard the aroma like hearing an unspoken voice. Behind the mist, the small boats belonging to fishermen had not yet gone out. The sky was not yet clear enough. The day was not yet fully awake. But the wind coming from the east brought stories about fertility, about islands with trees storing the sun's heat in their small seeds. The wind brought traces of spice fragrance from places the boy had never imagined. In that small village, the adults were still asleep, or just waking up to the sound of roosters calling the morning. No one realized that the aroma of cloves was entering their beach. No one knew that the world was moving slowly towards their land. The world does not always move with big steps, sometimes it moves with a small aroma carried by the wind. The boy opened his eyes. The mist began to lift a little, and in the distance he saw a faint line that he recognized as the neighboring island. Nothing was different about that view. Yet the feeling of this morning felt different. There was something very small, yet very significant. Something he couldn't explain, but could feel. That aroma. The aroma that woke the world a little earlier. The wind changed direction slowly and carried the aroma away. But before it disappeared completely, the aroma left something inside the boy's chest, a feeling that the sea did not just carry fish and wind. The sea carried messages. And one of those messages was the scent of spices that would one day connect their islands with the distant world. The boy smiled slightly without knowing the reason. He rose slowly and patted the sand from his body. The day had just begun, yet inside him was an impression he would remember for a lifetime, that this morning, he smelled something that made the sea feel wider than usual. Behind him, the sun finally came out fully, breaking the mist and opening the day. The sounds of the village began to be heard, the sound of buckets being pulled from wells, the sound of wooden doors opening, the sound of chickens calling each other. Life went on normally. No one knew that the world had just touched their small beach. But the sea knew. The wind knew. And that aroma knew. Because something was beginning, something big but moving very softly, like steps not wanting to wake anyone. The spice route had just breathed for the first time. When the sun rose a little higher and the mist covering the sea began to lift completely, the land of Nusantara showed its face in a different way compared to the water's surface. The sea spoke with sound, with rhythm, with motion that was never still. But the land spoke with silence. A long silence. A deep silence. A silence that did not demand to be heard, but always invited those trying to understand where life came from. Amidst the islands scattered like shards of emerald on blue water, there were tropical forests with skies covered by dense leaves. Sunlight trying to enter had to pass through thousands of leaves before finally touching the ground in the form of small shards bouncing like water currents. Under the shadows of these trees, Nusantara's great secret grew, spices that would one day shake the world without ever shouting. No one knew for sure when spices first appeared on these islands. There were no records. No inscriptions. No legends that clearly mentioned their birth. What existed was only the reality that the land of Nusantara, with its humid climate, faithful rain, and warm sun, grew trees not found elsewhere on the face of the earth. The clove tree grew upright and slender, with dark green leaves that seemed to store dozens of seasons within them. Its flowers were small, yellowish white, but once dried, turned into hard black grains whose aroma could penetrate the world. Further south and east, in the small Banda archipelago, the nutmeg tree grew in a way even more mysterious. Its fruit was like a small yellow ball, its skin peeling slowly when ripe and revealing a red layer like a net, mace, wrapping the shiny black seed inside. The people of Banda in the past believed that nutmeg seeds carried spirits protecting their homes, so they stored them with full respect. Spices for them were not just trade goods, but part of spiritual life. Meanwhile, in the western part of Nusantara, on the island of Sumatra, cinnamon grew on tree trunks whose bark wound like scrolls of time. When peeled, its aroma spread as if something warm was coming out of that tree, not just a scent, but also a soft impression touching the deepest side of the human body. In Java, ginger rhizomes crept underground, storing the sun's heat within their fine fibers. When pounded and boiled, it radiated an aroma that made the body feel it had returned to its origin. The land of Nusantara never tried to show its greatness. The land only gave. All those spices grew not because humans forced them to grow, but because the land chose to nurture them. There were no large fields. No giant plantations. No heavy machinery. Only human hands, weather, patience, and time. When a small farmer harvested cloves, he stepped on the soil slowly, as if afraid to disturb the forest's breath. When a mother dried nutmeg on woven bamboo, she waited for the sun to dry it in the gentlest way. When a healer took a cinnamon stick, he did it without hurry, believing that every spice had the right time to be taken. The people of Nusantara never thought about the economic value of spices. They only knew that these plants healed, warmed, and nurtured life. Cloves could relieve toothache. Ginger warmed the body when rain came without permission. Nutmeg helped babies sleep more soundly. Cinnamon became a comforter after a day of work. All this was part of a very old relationship between humans and the land. A relationship not written in books, but passed down through hands and taste. One day, A small child on Banda Island saw a nutmeg fruit fall from a tree, its skin opening like a flower revealing a hidden secret. He picked it up, feeling the warm smell coming from the seed. He looked at the black seed for a long time, like looking at a star hidden in his grasp. He did not know that the small seed would bring great ships from Europe at some time. He did not know that the small seed would be the reason for great conflicts. All he knew was one thing: the aroma made him feel calm. The land of Nusantara, with all its simplicity and mystery, held a treasure realized by no one. A treasure that did not sparkle like gold, was not hard like iron, was not rare like gemstones. But precisely because it was simple, it was strong. The aroma of spices was not a blinding bright light, it was a scent that crept softly into the human soul and stayed there long after the wind had passed. The silent land kept something that would one day move ships from all over the world. Something that would one day make the map change color. Something that would one day make the world know the word Nusantara not as a foreign name, but as the home of an aroma they could not forget. And while the world did not yet know it, the land continued to work in silence. Growing. Caring. Creating small aromas that would later become the long breath of the spice route. Before the spice route was known to the world as a long road connecting continents, before foreign kingdoms recorded it in books and maps, before kings and emperors debated rights over the oceans, the route first lived in the hands of Nusantara sailors. They were not sailors with royal emblems on their boats' sails, nor people who recorded their journeys on leather scrolls or palm leaves. They were sailors who learned not from teachers, but from the sea, not from words, but from the wind, not from theory, but from silence. In a coastal village, when the sun had not yet fully risen, the sailors began work without rushing, as if every step had to follow the earth's rhythm. They tidied the sails stored in the bamboo hall the night before, checked the ropes made from wara tree fibers, ropes that if touched felt alive, as if storing the breath of their makers. They raised the sails, tidied the knots, checked the wind direction by feeling the air on their palms. There were no loud commands. No official orders. The sailors worked with movements trained by time and passed down from generation to generation. When the boat was pushed into the sea, the sound of wood touching water sounded like an opening prayer. The boat glided slowly, creating ripples that formed small circles, spreading in all directions. The sea welcomed them not as guests, but as returning children. The sailors stared at the horizon and saw something ordinary people might not see: changes in sky color, cloud shadows, mist lines that seemed to reveal the existence of other islands in the distance. The sea was not an empty space for them, the sea was a living map that changed every day but could still be read by those willing to be silent. They knew the wind as if the wind was an old friend sending subtle messages. The west wind brought certain signs, the east wind brought different stories. When the wind blew from the north with a certain softness, the sailors knew the rainy season was getting closer. When the south wind blew the smell of wet earth, they knew the sea was in a good mood. They did not read the weather with eyes, they read it with skin, ears, and intuition growing from the habit of living near the sea since childhood. An old sailor often said to young children sailing for the first time, "Listen to the sea like you listen to the person you love. It does not always speak loudly. It sometimes speaks with silence. And precisely in that silence, it is most honest." The children nodded even though they didn't fully understand yet. But time always explained everything to patient sailors. In long journeys that often took weeks, the sailors carried spices in woven bamboo baskets. Cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and cinnamon were placed in the safest place of the boat. Not only because the spices were valuable, but because spices brought an aroma that soothed the soul when the night became too dark. The spices were not just merchandise, they were reminders of home. When the night wind felt cold and the sea seemed too wide, the sailors took a clove, rubbed it between their fingers, and let the aroma rise slowly. The aroma was like the soft hand of the motherland, touching them and saying, "You are not far from home." On moonless nights, the small boat was like a small leaf among the waves. But the sailors felt no fear. They looked at the stars, which for them were not sky decorations, but signs that could be read. Constellations like boats, like birds, like spears, all gave direction, time, and season. Nusantara sailors did not rely on just one star, they read the entire night sky as a whole. If one star was covered by clouds, another star gave a clue. And if all stars disappeared, they listened to the sea. The sea speaking in waves. Sometimes, in the journey, they stopped rowing and let the boat move following the current. They took a long breath, inhaling the aroma of spices they carried, and closed their eyes. In that silence, the sailors could feel where the boat should go. Not with the mind, but with the body. Their bodies merged with the boat, and the boat merged with the sea. They became part of something much bigger, a web of life invisible, but felt. When dawn appeared after a long night, the soft light touched the water surface like a mother's hand touching her child's face. The sailors opened their eyes and saw the faint line of an island in the distance. They were not surprised. They knew the island was there. They knew their direction was correct. Because they did not wait for big signs, they followed small signs whispered by nature throughout the journey. Upon arrival at the destination island, the sailors got off the boat with slow steps, letting their feet feel the new ground. They did not come to conquer. They came to trade, share stories, hear stories, and bring home something that might be different from what they brought. Every island had its own aroma, the smell of its soil, the smell of wind, the smell of forest. The sailors inhaled everything like someone inhaling an old memory. They exchanged spices for ceramics, cloth, or other produce. No one was in a hurry. No one pressured each other. The spice route at this time was a route born of mutual trust, not written rules. The sailors understood that spices were not just commodities, spices were the way the earth spoke to each other through humans. And when the time to return home arrived, the sailors looked at the sea with gratitude. They knew the sea not only took them to a new place, but returned them to their place of origin carrying stories of the world. Then they raised the sails again, following the wind that guided them home. Their journey was never about fast or slow. Their journey was about listening. Because for Nusantara sailors, the sea was not a place to be conquered. The sea was their greatest teacher. On an afternoon when the sunlight began to drop and the sky turned soft orange, a small port in Nusantara came alive in a way that was never noisy. No loud voices dominated. No shouted commands like in big ports in distant lands. No roar of metal and clang of iron. The Nusantara port moved like someone taking a slow breath before sleep. Everything happened, but without hoping to be seen. The port was not big. Its pier was made of wooden planks tied with rattan ropes. Several poles stood as markers. Small and medium boats lined up gently at the water's edge, rocking slowly following the tidal motion. Yet although simple, this place was like a vast sheet of cloth connecting islands, stories, and lives. Here the spice route began to get its first form, not as a road made by humans, but as a meeting point between those who sought and those who gave. Local traders came from various regions, from Sumatra fragrant with cinnamon, from Java with strong ginger, from Maluku with cloves and nutmeg that could not be found anywhere else. They carried rattan baskets filled with newly harvested spices, their aroma spreading and mixing with the smell of the sea. When the wind passed, the port smelled like the world's kitchen starting its first cooking. An old trader from Banda placed his basket slowly on the pier floor. He stared at the afternoon light falling on the neatly arranged nutmeg seeds. The red mace layer looked like soft nets hugging the black seed inside. The trader stroked his beard and smiled slightly. He always felt that nutmeg was not just a fruit. Nutmeg was the small heart of Banda, warm, fragrant, and full of mystery. He knew that one day, traders from distant lands would consider the small fruit as gold. But for him, nutmeg was just an old friend. Not far from there, a young woman from Java cut ginger and dried it on banana leaves. The smell of ginger spread, warm and spicy, making the air more alive. She did not sell spices just to find food. She sold spices as a form of prayer. Every piece of ginger was part of her work with nature, a relationship she inherited from her mother and grandmother. The plant was not hers. She only cared for something allowed to grow on her land. On the other side of the port, a trader from Sumatra opened a roll of newly harvested cinnamon. Its bark curled like old paper that had stored secrets. Its sweet smell seeped into the afternoon air. The smell did not just call people to buy. The smell called memories, about mornings at home, about warm soup, about family ceremonies. Cinnamon was a story that never finished. And then, from a distance, the sound of slow rowing was heard. A foreign ship, larger than local boats, approached the port. The ship carried traders from distant lands. No big flags waving. No line of soldiers. No signs of threat. These people came as guests, not conquerors. When the ship touched the pier, the local traders did not move fast. They stayed in their slow rhythm. The Nusantara port never needed manufactured busyness. Guests would come, and the port would receive them. That was all. The strangers got off the ship with eyes full of curiosity. They wore different clothes, long cloth from India, robes from Arabia, hats from mainland China. They were not yet able to speak the local language. But when the aroma of spices touched their noses, no language was needed anymore. An Arab trader approached a basket of nutmeg, bowed his head, and inhaled its aroma slowly. A smile appeared on his face. He had smelled this aroma before, in his country, in the busy Middle Eastern markets, but he had never smelled the original version, the version coming directly from its tree, not from intermediaries. His eyes glazed over a little. Not because he was sad, but because he felt he had come home to something he had been looking for years. Nearby, a Chinese trader rubbed a cinnamon stick, looking at its fine fibers. He knew that this spice had the power to warm the body. But he did not know that this tree grew from land full of soft rain. He did not know that the bark stored stories of rainy and dry seasons coming interchangeably. But as he touched it, he felt something warm creeping into his fingers. The meeting took place without commotion. The traders spoke through hand signals, through smiles, through small laughs. They pointed at their goods, compared, and finally reached an agreement without high voices. Spices were exchanged for silk cloth, ceramics, metal, and other goods not from Nusantara. No local trader felt disadvantaged. No foreign trader felt cheated. The Nusantara port was the place where the world met with the oldest language, the language of taste. As the sun went down further, the port's color changed. The water reflected golden light, making the spices look glowing. Everyone seemed to work in soft silhouettes, like long shadows moving slowly. Behind all that, the aroma of spices remained the center of all motion. It became the reason sailors came, the reason traders stopped by, the reason the sea kept opening its way. At night, When all activities began to subside, and when the moon rose slowly above the water, the port returned to calm. Traders sat on the edge, talking softly or just being silent together. The night wind brought back the spice aroma, this time softer, thinner, but feeling warmer. Someone said softly, without knowing who heard it. Spices are not just goods, spices are the reason humans from different places understand each other. The port did not answer. It didn't need to. It only exhaled a soft wind, causing the oil lamps to tremble, as if nodding slowly that what was said was true. Because in that small port, the spice route began to breathe as something more than trade, it became a bridge. In a corner of the world far from Nusantara, in a place where desert sands circled like waves that were never wet, where green valleys appeared like gems between rocky hills, and where great rivers flowed carrying thousands of years of history, the soft aroma of Nusantara spices began to slip in. It came not as a shocking wave, but as a thin whisper creeping through markets, wilderness, and caravan roads. In Persia, an old healer was mixing a potion for a nobleman suffering from fever. He opened small bags containing leaves, roots, and dried flowers. When he took a clove from the smallest bag, he stopped for a moment. The aroma was strong, warm, spicy, but also sweet. He stared at the small grain like staring at the eyes of someone just met but feeling familiar. "Where do you come from?" he muttered in a language only the room's walls heard. There was no answer, but the aroma seemed to say, "I come from afar, very far." In India, royal cooks found something that never existed before. In the large kitchen, where dozens of clay pots boiled over wood fires, the aroma of nutmeg slipped into the cooking. They sprinkled a pinch and then added a little more. The cooking changed. The taste became soft but firm, warm but light. The cooks looked at each other, trying to guess how something so small could change the whole character of a dish. They asked the traders, and the traders only shrugged, smiled, and said, "This is from the land where the wind is fragrant." In China, Nusantara spices became part of important rituals. Healers of the early dynasty placed a cinnamon stick on hot water and let it dissolve slowly. Thin smoke rose from the large bowl they used for healing ceremonies. They nodded slightly, as if feeling something flowing not only in the patient's body, but also in the air. The cinnamon was considered a connector between the human world and the spirit world. Not because of its shape, not because of its color, but because of the aroma emerging slowly, as if conveying a soft message from its place of origin. Sometimes, the spices were carried by Arab sailors on long journeys crossing the Indian Ocean. The journey took months. Large ships moved following the monsoon wind direction. Among other goods, cloth, copper, pottery, Nusantara spices were placed in small chests. Some chests broke when storms came, and the aroma of nutmeg spread on the ship's deck. The exhausted sailors, with bodies full of sea salt and damp clothes, felt fresher even though they didn't know why. The aroma worked like a prayer sent by a distant land, "Stay alive. Your journey is not finished." In the markets of Baghdad, Nusantara spices were sold in small amounts, very small, but at high prices. Clever traders always placed the spices on the front table, not because they wanted to show off expensive goods, but because the aroma was able to attract people even before they saw it. A buyer stopped, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. The aroma was like taking someone to a place he didn't know but felt familiar. "Where is that land?" asked the buyer. The trader answered, "At the end of the wind." But no one really knew where Nusantara was located. No map marked the region precisely. The outside world only knew that spices came from the east, but the east for those nations was too vast, vaster than could be imagined. Some people said that spices came from islands guarded by giant birds. Some believed that spices came from trees growing at the edge of the world, trees that could only be harvested when the sun was at a certain point. There were also those who said spices were born from the belly of a sea dragon and could only be taken by brave sailors. All those stories were wrong, but all those stories were also true in their own way. Because spices indeed came from a miracle, not from mythological creatures, but from the miracle of the soil. In a tea shop in the northern plains of China, an old trader from Arabia spoke to his friend while heating a cup of warm drink. With a low voice, he said, "I once heard that the spice grows on islands that are never truly dry. The soil is always damp, the air always fragrant. I want to go there one day." His friend just laughed softly and answered, "Everyone wants to go there. But the wind may not want to take you." When spices began to enter the major trade routes, the world began to change. Not suddenly, not in an instant, but through a slow flow that perhaps could only be felt by those who were sensitive. Like a river changing course little by little every season, spices changed the lives of nations subtly. Cooking that was once simple became rich in flavor. Medicine that was once harsh became gentler. Religious ceremonies got new symbols. Trade got a new direction. And leaders began to think of the world more broadly, further, deeper. But even though the world began to fall in love with spices, they still did not understand one thing, that the small aroma came from a very simple land. A land that never considered itself the center of the world. A land that only gave without asking. In the small houses of Nusantara, a grandmother was pounding ginger for her grandson who had a cold. She did not know that the spice she pounded was the reason a distant king in Persia summoned his advisor. She did not know that the spice made a Chinese trader travel 5,000 li. She did not know that a clove she kept could make an Arab sailor cry in longing. The grandmother only knew one thing, that the aroma was part of her life, part of her land, part of her heart. It was that aroma that made the world ask, in the softest way, about the land where the wind carries fragrance. On a day when the sun had just woken up and its light was still shy, a small Nusantara port sighed, as if welcoming something long awaited by the wind, by the sea, even by the land. Small waves came and went with a very regular rhythm, like the soft steps of a mother putting her child to sleep. In the distance, a dark line appeared slowly behind the morning mist. Not a bird. Not an island. Nor a low cloud. It was a ship, a foreign ship, larger than local boats, with wide sails and tall masts, moving like a giant institution carried by the wind from a place unimaginable to the locals. Coastal residents began to arrive at the beach. They did not panic. There was no fear. Only curiosity flowing like river water in the rainy season. They had heard stories from sailors coming from different islands, that there were people from distant lands, lands they had never seen, but their spices had reached them. Now, the ship was before them, real, slowly approaching. The first ship to arrive that day came from India. The ship's wood was dark, its skin smoothed by thousands of waves. Dull ivory-colored sails flapped softly like the chest of someone breathing in sleep. The moment the ship touched the Nusantara water edge, a small squeak was heard, the sound of wood touching a new world. The Indian traders got off the ship with movements full of caution. They wore long clothes of warm colors, red, yellow, and earth brown. Their hair was tied, and some carried small wooden boxes carved with intricate motifs. They did not speak much. When stepping on the ground, they bowed their heads as a form of respect, whether to the earth they stepped on or to the gods they believed in. The Nusantara residents nodded slightly, because they understood the language of politeness despite different cultures. No words were exchanged at first, only soft smiles, only the wind blowing the hair of both parties, only the aroma of spices connecting them without sound. Near the Indian traders, another ship followed a few days later, a ship with a different shape, longer and slender, with dark red sails looking like autumn leaves. This ship came from China. Its crew wore long robes fluttering softly as they descended the ship. They carried chests containing silk cloth, fine pottery, and paper scrolls having a distinctive ink smell. They stared at the Nusantara forest with eyes sharp and soft at the same time, eyes that had seen many lands, but remained amazed at the beauty silent in front of them. Not long after that, when the wind season changed, when the west wind began to take over the ocean, a ship from Arabia arrived. A larger ship, with strong supports and signs of craftsmanship from desert sailors. The Arab traders got off in long white clothes, turbans wound neatly, and dark eyes that seemed to store the distance of a long journey from dry land to humid and aroma-filled land. They brought glass, gems, and fragrant oils stored in small bottles. But when they arrived, the first thing they did was inhale the air deeply. They closed their eyes. The aroma of Nusantara welcomed them. The soft smell of sea salt. The smell of wet wood from the tropical forest. The smell of ripe fruit and leaves. The smell of humans, soil, and wind uniting in harmony. And the strongest, the aroma of spices. The traders opened their eyes slowly. A small smile appeared at the corners of their lips. They did not doubt that they had arrived at the right land. In that port, the meeting of cultures happened not through loud voices, but through silence full of feeling. Local traders showed their spice baskets, cloves black and hard, nutmeg wrapped in red mace looking like fine nets, ginger with soil still sticking to fibers, and cinnamon rolled like scrolls of time. Foreign traders approached, inhaled the aroma, rubbed it with fingers, felt the texture, and understood that what they saw was not just merchandise, but part of life. Exchange happened without pressure. An Indian trader gave a piece of sea blue silk cloth in exchange for a handful of nutmeg and cloves. A Chinese trader exchanged fine pottery for cinnamon and ginger. Arab traders gave glass and fragrant oils for spices they would bring home and sell as special items. All proceeded peacefully, slowly, like a river flow never rushing to the sea. At night, the port became quieter. Oil lamps were lit, and reflected on the water's surface like stars floating. Traders from various lands sat together on the beach, drinking warm ginger water made by locals. They could not speak one language, but they understood the warmth of the drink they held. They understood the taste of small bread baked on stone. They understood smiles. They understood the wind touching their skin the same way wherever they were. Amidst that small crowd, an old trader from Arabia said in a language not understood by everyone, "This earth is fragrant in sleep." Someone beside him did not understand his words, but he understood the feeling. Nusantara, with its soft sea and warm land, indeed felt like a place always dreaming, and the aroma of spices was the dream that made the world want to come. The cultural meeting did not change Nusantara drastically. No kingdoms fell. No wars. No seizures. What changed was only the air now carrying new stories from distant places. Air carrying curiosity. Air carrying the beginning of something much bigger. And in the soothing gust of the night wind, that small port became a silent witness to the world's first meeting with the home of spices. In a small village surrounded by nutmeg forests and tall clove trees, night fell slowly like a thin blanket pulled from the sky. Moonlight reflected softly on the surface of large leaves, leaving a silvery sheen that looked like still water. The wind moved very slowly, carrying the aroma of ripe fruit, wet soil, old wood, and of course, spices. For Nusantara residents, spices were not just goods that could be harvested and sold. Spices were a language connecting humans with the earth, body with soul, and the present with ancestors. Before spices became a world commodity, before they were weighed at high prices in distant markets, spices were family warmth, medicine that healed, prayers whispered, and fragrance keeping the home peaceful. In a simple wooden house, a grandmother sat cross-legged on a pandan mat. In front of her was a small bowl containing coconut oil and a few cloves. Beside her, her small grandson was lying down due to fever. The grandmother took a clove, ground it with a little oil in her palm, and rubbed her grandson's forehead gently. The rubbing was not just an act of caring, it was a form of love passed down from generation to generation. Every spice contained a memory. Every scent contained a story. Cloves to warm. Nutmeg to calm sleep. Ginger to drive away cold wind. Cinnamon to soothe the stomach and heart. Spices taught that the human body is part of the same nature, that illness is not an enemy, but a message from the body needing attention. In another house, a mother chewed a little ginger before cooking it into a thin soup. She never learned in school about ginger content or its nutritional value. She didn't need to. She followed intuition inherited from her mother. As the ginger aroma began to fill the house, her little siblings approached, feeling the scent like feeling home itself. The aroma was a place to return, a safe place, a place always waiting. Spices did not only warm the body. They warmed feelings. On a Banda Hill slope, a young man was staring at a newly fallen nutmeg. He peeled its yellow skin slowly, revealing the red mace layer wrapping the black seed. The mace for him was not just a cooking ingredient. The thin layer was a symbol of life, protection enveloping something hard and valuable. He looked at it for a moment, feeling the texture and aroma, then placed it in his rattan basket. Tomorrow, he would exchange it at the port for small pottery or new cloth. But tonight, he just wanted to enjoy the silence of the nutmeg trees swaying slowly, as if breathing with him. The trees were teachers who didn't speak. They taught patience, because spices did not grow in a day. They taught steadfastness, because spices had to endure rain and wind. They taught that something small could have great power. And in the deeper forest, among tall trees embracing each other, spices were used in old rituals unrecorded in history books. Elders took cinnamon and burned it in a small ceremony to summon harvest blessings. Thin smoke rose to the air, carrying a sweet smell mixed with the smell of earth. They believed the smoke carried prayers to the sky, not with loud voices, but with scent. By the river, a small group of women used warm ginger water to bathe a newborn baby. The baby cried softly, but when the warm water touched its skin, the crying subsided. Ginger, for them, was the first welcome to life, warm, friendly, and full of protection. A mother whispered in her baby's ear, "You were born from fragrant land. May your life bring that fragrance in every step." The words were not a spell, not a formal prayer, they were a reminder that humans are born from a place with a soul. Spices were also used to send off those who died. When someone passed away, the family sprinkled cloves and nutmeg around their body. Not to preserve. Not to cover smells. But as a form of respect, as a sign that someone returned to the same land that grew the spices. Spices accompanied humans from birth to death. Never left behind. Never replaced. Even in romance, spices were present. A young man wanting to propose to his dream girl often brought a small gift containing selected spices. Not because the spices were expensive, but because they carried meaning. Spices were a symbol of seriousness. That he wanted to build a fragrant home, a warm life, a healthy family. The girl receiving the spices would keep them like keeping hope. Because she knew, the man choosing spices to propose was a man understanding the depth of the land and the gentleness of life. And so, spices wove life not through words, but through taste and aroma. Through the body. Through breath. Through small spaces of the house. Through the silent forest. Through the flowing river. Through the quiet port. Through simple trade. The outside world saw spices as treasure, gold, a reason to sail. But in their land of origin, spices were something much softer. They were a language. A language not spoken with the mouth, but understood by the heart. By the earth. By the wind. By generations coming and going. A language teaching humans how to live. Before shipping lanes were drawn on maps, before foreign navigation experts wrote long lines on animal skin or paper, before anyone called it the spice route, the route already existed, but in a form invisible to human eyes. The route lived in the wind, in ocean currents, in seasons coming and going with loyalty only understood by people listening to nature, not calculating it. The route was not a human creation, humans only discovered it. Every year, the monsoon wind changed the Nusantara world in a very subtle yet influential way. When the west wind blew from the direction of Africa and India towards the east, foreign ships began sailing towards Nusantara, bringing goods from distant lands, silk cloth, ceramics, glass, metal, and foreign stories whispered by water and sky. When the east wind blew back to the west, the ships returned, this time with spices stored in small chests that would change the cuisine, rituals, medicines, and even politics of the nations awaiting their arrival. In the morning when the wind season changed, Nusantara sailors stood at the water's edge, closing their eyes, and feeling the change like someone feeling the heartbeat of a loved one. The wind did not lie. The wind always came on time. And when the wind changed, the world changed too. The shipping lane was not straight. Never straight. The lane did not follow a firm long line like in a map. The lane followed the curve of the wind, followed the current flow, followed the stars moving a little every night, followed the feeling and intuition of humans used to reading the world through the body, not the mind. The journey from India toward Sumatra followed the sea flow moving slowly from the southwest. The journey from Arabia towards Aceh followed a stronger current, carrying the smell of desert mixed with the smell of Nusantara rain. The journey from China to Java followed a calmer path, through shallow seas and coral islands whose colors changed from dark blue to clear green when ships passed over them. Nusantara sailors did not name the route. No one called it with a specific term. No one carved it on wood. They just called it the Wind Road, or the Sea Street, or sometimes just the journey. They didn't need a name for something they felt every day. On a night when the full round moon hung like a big fruit above the water, an old sailor sat on the stern of his boat. He looked at the sky, looking for a certain star, the star he called the homecoming star. The star was not bright, not conspicuous, but always appeared at the same time every year. It reminded him of home. Of the family waiting. Of the village small but having a fragrance other places didn't have. The night wind moved with a very soft rhythm. The sailor smiled slightly. He knew that the wind would bring his boat back to his home island, like a mother calling her child home after playing outside for a long time. The spice route was never formed through power. Never formed through war. Never formed with force. The route was formed by cooperation between nature and humans. By wind that couldn't be controlled. By currents that couldn't be changed. By humans understanding they were not rulers of the sea, but guests lucky enough to be allowed to pass through it. For centuries, these routes became life for small islands. Ships coming brought fine cloth to be used in wedding ceremonies. Pottery from China used to store coconut oil or holy water. Glass from the Middle East hung in old houses, reflecting sunlight like small stars. And in return, those nations brought home Nusantara spices, making their cuisine more alive, making their medicine gentler, making their rituals more fragrant. But not only goods moved along the spice route. Words moved. Stories moved. Beliefs moved. Ways of thinking moved. Music moved. Dances moved. The world moved slowly but surely, along the route that was initially just wind and water. In a village in Java, an old woman taught a soft dance she learned from her mother, who used to learn the dance from an Indian woman who once lived in the village for several seasons. The dance became part of their culture, even though its origin came from the sea. On an island in Maluku, a child learned a song from an Arab trader living for a few weeks. The song was sung every night, as if originating from there. All that happened without anyone feeling that something was changing. Because the most beautiful change is the change unnoticed. Change growing like spices, slow, soft, but full of power. And while the world began to recognize the importance of the spice route, Nusantara remained living in its old rhythm, harvesting spices by hand, trading without haste, listening to wind direction every morning, and trusting stars like trusting their own family. Foreigners began calling the route the Road to Fragrant Land, or Black Gold Road, or Eastern Route bringing miracles. Some traders began making simple maps. Some sailors began drawing lines in the sand as direction pointers. But for Nusantara people themselves, the route remained unchanged. It was a route taken because the world needed each other, not because the world conquered each other. On a bright morning, small Nusantara boats sailed side by side with large ships from China, India, and Arabia. No hustle and bustle, no competition, no fear. Only the sound of the wind, the sound of wood, the sound of water breaking the sea surface. Every ship carried something different. Every wind brought a story. Every journey brought a future. And the spice route continued to lengthen, not through straight lines, but through human lives crossing each other. No one knew exactly when this route was born. No one recorded the date. No one wrote the first event. This route was born when the wind first carried the aroma of cloves out of the forest, and someone in a distant place inhaled a fragrance he did not know. The route was born when the world first asked, "Where does this fragrance come from?" And the wind answered softly, "From a distant land, a silent land, a fragrant land." On a quiet night in Baghdad, a scribe sat under a trembling oil lamp. The ink at the tip of his pen slowly dried when he stopped writing, only to stare at the small bowl beside him. Inside the bowl were cloves, black, hard, small. He held them with fingers accustomed to pens and scrolls. He lifted them to his nose and inhaled slowly. The aroma triggered something strange within him, a feeling that the world was much bigger than what he had written so far. That there was a place he had never seen, but he could feel it through the aroma that traveled thousands of miles to reach him. He wrote slowly in his notes. "This clove is more precious than precious stones. Not because of its shape, but because it carries the trace of a place we never reached with our feet." He did not know that at the same time, in a royal kitchen in India, a cook was stirring a large pot containing nut sauce, milk, and spices. He added a pinch of nutmeg, stirred slowly, and tasted it. His eyes closed for a few seconds. He did not just taste food. He tasted a journey. He tasted the heat of the Bonda sun. He tasted the humidity of the tropical forest. He tasted the sea wind moving without sound. He tasted the world. Meanwhile, in China, a healer was examining a patient complaining of a cold stomach. He wrote a very simple prescription: a cup of warm water with cinnamon, drunk at dawn. For that healer, cinnamon was not just medicine. Cinnamon was a bridge between the body and nature. When he placed the piece of cinnamon into hot water, its sweet aroma rose slowly, like roots growing to the sky. He knew, in a way he couldn't explain, that the tree came from a land full of rain. The outside world began to change because of spices, but that change came in the softest way. No shouting. No thunder. No uproar. The change came like an aroma flowing from the kitchen, entering room after room, until the whole house felt it without realizing when the aroma began to be present. Cuisine changed first. For nations outside Nusantara, spices became something that could not be left out. Cloves were used to preserve meat. Nutmeg was kept as royal food seasoning. Ginger was used in tea, soup, and health potions. Cinnamon became the main ingredient of warm drinks served during winter. Spices changed the taste of the world. After cuisine changed, medicines changed too. Traditional medicine began using spices as part of important recipes. Cloves to reduce pain. Nutmeg to calm. Ginger to strengthen the stomach. Cinnamon to warm the blood. In places far from Nusantara, spices made the human body feel closer to nature. Spices became a reminder that health comes not only from strength, but also from balance. Then, rituals changed. In religious celebrations, spices were used as offerings. Nutmeg was burned for its aroma. Cinnamon was used in incense. Cloves were kept as amulets. And in wedding rituals, spices became symbols of blessing, warmth, and new life. The outside world gave new meanings to spices, but spices still carried the old meaning from Nusantara: warmth, home, and life. And finally, the deepest thing changed: how humans viewed the world. They began to ask about the distant land producing spices. They began to think of the world as something that could be explored. They began to imagine the sea, islands, wind, and land in a new way. Spices triggered curiosity. Curiosity triggered journeys. Journeys triggered relationships. Relationships triggered cultural, economic, and even political changes. Meanwhile, in Nusantara, this change felt like a soft gust of wind. The local people remained living in their slow rhythm. They did not think about the economic value of spices on a world scale. They only knew that spices grew on their land, and that the land must be respected. They did not know that kings in distant lands began thinking of strategies to get spices. They did not know that foreign traders began keeping secret maps. They did not know that the world slowly considered spices as a reason to explore further than before. They only knew one thing: that their lives remained the same: planting, harvesting, cooking, trading in warm silence. In a village in Maluku, a young man gazed at the night sky. He knew that more and more ships came every season, but he did not consider it a threat. He considered it part of life. He looked at the stars hanging calmly, and felt that the world became bigger than he imagined. But his heart remained small, simple, and soft, because his world was nutmeg trees, the sound of wind, and the aroma of cloves that always belonged to his land. In a small Javanese village, a mother put a piece of cinnamon into her child's hot drink. She did not know that the cinnamon would be used in Persian royal cuisine or Chinese ceremonies. She only knew that her child would be warm. And for her, that was enough. The world was changed by spices. But Nusantara kept walking in its own steps. And so the spice route grew longer, wider, bigger. But still, at the deepest core, the route was not about trade, not about wealth, not about building kingdoms. The route was about aroma. A small aroma connecting humans from different places without sound. Aroma moving further than human feet could step. Aroma becoming the reason the world began to move. Aroma making the world want to know. Who planted this miracle? And Nusantara answered, slowly. Through wind, through silence, through its soft land. Me. In a large market in the port city of Gujarat, West India, the afternoon sun fell slowly and reflected golden light on cloth tents lined up long like small hills of red, blue, and yellow. Traders had begun packing their merchandise, but one part of the market remained busy, the spice section. There, old wooden tables were filled with black cloves arranged neatly like small gems, shiny nutmeg like bird of paradise eyes, cinnamon rolled like ancient letters, and ginger whose skin looked like roots hugging the ground. A rich trader stood looking at nutmeg he bought from an Arab sailor. He held it in his grasp as if holding something more precious than his own life. For him, a nutmeg seed was an item worthy of being kept in a jewelry box. Even gold could not match the fragrance coming out when nutmeg was split. He muttered softly, "If the world loses gold, the world will keep running. But if the world loses spices, the taste of life is gone." That remark was confirmed by a sailor standing next to him, his body full of sea salt, his clothes worn, but his eyes sharp like someone who had seen many lands. The sailor knew the price of spices in various markets. He knew how kings paid dearly for spices only the size of a fingernail. He knew how healers in Persia asked for cloves like asking for sacred medicine. He knew how Chinese palace cooks asked for cinnamon for imperial feasts. Spices changed from ordinary goods into objects exceeding their own value. One handful of cloves could be exchanged for one roll of silk. One basket of nutmeg could pay for a full boat. Cinnamon was as precious as silver. Ginger became more important than rare medicine. Elsewhere, in Cairo, a big trader kept Nusantara spices in a wooden chest guarded by 2 guards. He did not protect that much gold. He did not protect that many precious stones. But he protected spices with full guard. Because he knew, one nutmeg grain could buy several horses. He knew a handful of cloves could pay for days of caravan travel. But not only Eastern nations understood the value of spices. In Europe, long before they arrived in Nusantara, news about the fragrance of spices had circulated long like a legend never explaining its origin. In Venice, rich merchants sat behind large tables with lit candles. They held Nusantara spices as if holding magical objects, although they did not know their land of origin. They bought spices from Arab and Indian traders, who had brought them through very long land and sea routes. The price of spices in Europe rose to unreasonable levels. A small bag of cloves was valued the same as a worker's annual salary. Nutmeg was considered capable of warding off plague, so it was sold like holy medicine. Cinnamon was treated like a royal item. European nobles put spices in glass boxes and displayed them on dining tables as if showing off power. Spices became status symbols, no longer just cooking ingredients. Owning spices meant owning a world wider than visible to the eye. However, behind all that luxury, no one in Europe really knew where spices came from. Sometimes they heard stories that spices came from the edge of the world. Sometimes they heard that spices grew on trees guarded by dragons. Sometimes they heard that spices fell from heaven when it rained. Sometimes they heard that spices were planted by sea gods. No one knew. No map. No clue. Only aroma filling markets, kitchens, and ceremonies. That aroma became a legend. That aroma became an obsession. In palace rooms, nobles whispered to each other. Where is that fragrant land located? Who owns those trees? How can we get them without intermediaries? Meanwhile, in Nusantara, a mother was cooking clear vegetable soup with a piece of ginger in it. A child was holding a nutmeg grain in his small pocket as a lucky charm. A fisherman carried cloves for provisions on a long journey so his body stayed warm. A healer planted a new cinnamon tree behind his house. No one felt they were holding goods more expensive than gold. Because for them, spices were part of life. Just like water. Just like soil. Just like breath. But the outside world did not see it that way. The outside world saw spices as the answer for disease, for food, for wealth, for power, even for glory. And just like that, slowly, quietly, without loud noise, spices changed the face of the world. It moved the economy. It changed the estuary of trade. It rearranged sea routes. It formed the wealth of big cities. It made kingdoms fight for routes. It made kings curious. It made sailors want to cross unknown oceans. But the biggest change had not yet come. That change was still sailing from afar, still following the trace of invisible aroma. One day, European sailors would ask the same question. Where is that fragrant land located? And when that question was not answered, they would sail. They would challenge oceans they did not know. They would chase the aroma they could never ignore. Because the world, in the end, would do anything to smell the fragrance of Nusantara from its source. The Nusantara Sea had always been a bright place, not because of the sun reflecting on its surface, but because of the human souls sailing it. For centuries, Indian, Arab, Chinese, and other Asian sailors saw the sea as a road, as a bridge, not as a battleground. They came bringing goods, stories, laughter, songs, and went home bringing spices, cloth, and memories. The sea was a place of living, not a place of ambition. But on a day recorded by no one, the wind brought something else. Something having no aroma. Something not coming from soil or plants. Something invisible to the eye, but felt by the skin. A change. A soft tension, like a smile held too long. It started with small news. News brought by Arab traders from the west, that distant nations across the Great Sea were talking about the fragrant land in the east. They talked about it not with admiration, but with desire. Desire unrecognized by Nusantara residents. Desire not about taste, not about health, not about life. Desire about ownership. In a small port in Malacca, an old trader listened to the news while sitting under a cloth umbrella. He smelled the air. He looked at the sea. He felt small waves coming from the west. His heart, having lived long with the sea, said in an unspoken whisper. The sea brings good people. The sea will also bring people who do not understand our language. He did not tell his worry to anyone. People around him kept trading as usual, weighing spices, drying ginger, helping foreign sailors unload goods. Nothing changed on the surface. But in silence, something had shifted. At night, Nusantara sailors sat at the water's edge, staring at the sky. They saw the same stars as usual, but they felt something different in the wind. The west wind came in a strange way, colder, heavier. An old sailor said, The wind carries a message. A message that is not fragrant. No one answered. Because they knew, there were things better left unspoken. Months later, other news came. This time from a newly arrived Indian trader. He brought a story about a nation newly appearing in Indian markets, a nation having clothes from large animal skins, loud voices, and eyes full of purpose. They asked one thing. Where do spices grow? Nusantara traders hearing that story tried to understand. How could someone want to own the place where spices grow? How could someone want to take over something given by the earth? For them, it was like wanting to take over the wind, or rainwater, or stars. But the world changed. Slowly. Without sound. Like the change of sea current direction only felt by those living on it. In Banda, a boy climbed a nutmeg tree like he did every day. He took a ripe fruit, threw it into the basket below. He smelled his nutmeg-scented hand and laughed a little. He thought life would always be like this. That the trees would always stand. That the wind would always bring fragrance. That spices would always be part of his life without him needing to think. He did not know that far in the west, in a cold European royal room, several kings were discussing the island where he climbed just now. They discussed the trees as if they were treasures waiting to be snatched. In Europe, nobles did not sleep well. They thought of ways to get spices directly from the source. They thought of new roads, new routes, new ships. They thought of the world not as a shared home, but as a field that could be mapped, measured, and owned. Meanwhile, in a Javanese port, an old woman was pounding ginger for her grandson. She stopped for a moment, feeling the wind passing through the house door. The wind brought a different sea smell. She did not know what it meant. She just felt the need to close the door faster that day. Elsewhere, a healer was teaching his student how to light cinnamon incense to summon calmness in the body. He said, "Life changes slowly. Like water learning the stone." His student nodded without fully understanding. And over the vast sea, far northwest, further than the route usually taken by Arab traders, large ships began to move. Ships with thick wood. With tall white sails. With hulls reinforced with iron. With hidden small cannons. With people carrying maps and obsession. They had not arrived. Not yet seen. Not yet smelled. But the wind already felt it. And the wind whispered the news to the sea. The sea whispered the news to the birds. Birds whispered the news to the trees. Trees whispered the news to the soil. And the soil whispered the news to humans. A great change was heading to Nusantara. Not as a guest. Not as a friend. But as a long shadow walking slowly from the horizon. And when the shadow got closer, the world was no longer just interested in the aroma of spices. The world wanted to rule it. But that night, under the soft moonlight, Nusantara residents remained living in their small peace. They slept with wind entering through bamboo gaps. They cooked with cinnamon and ginger. They covered their children with thin cloth. The world had not changed for them. Not yet. But the sea already knew. And the sea was never wrong. In a soft morning, when mist fell slowly from green hills and floated low above the sea surface, the Nusantara world seemed to breathe longer than usual. The wind passing the water surface felt unhurried. The water touching the sand had no intention to return to the middle of the sea immediately. Everything seemed to slow itself down, as if realizing that the journey so long, a journey never recorded completely, was approaching a circle that should be closed with silence, not with sound. Spices had gone through a journey much bigger than themselves. They grew from silent soil, under trees never ambitious to become legends. They lived in the hands of small farmers, in simple home kitchens, in rattan baskets rocked by wind, in forests hugging rain. They were then taken by small sailors to small ports, then to big ships, then to the wide world that never could imagine that something so small was able to move history. But although the journey was so long, in the end, spices returned to the same core, soil, earth. Life running without praise. In a small village in Maluku, an old woman sat in front of her house, holding a nutmeg grain in hand. She looked at the small spice as if looking at her own child. She knew the seed would go far if traders came tomorrow. She knew the seed might reach a land she never heard of. She knew the seed might be used in noble cuisine, or healer potions, or rituals of distant people. But for her, nutmeg was just nutmeg. Fruit growing from the tree behind the house. Fruit she found every season without fail. She smiled slightly. No pride in her smile. Only calmness. Because she understood something the outside world did not, that spices were never born to change the world. Spices were born to be part of the world. Great changes were just side effects of something very simple, fragrance. Meanwhile, in a larger port, ships from India, Arabia, and China alternately came and went. Traders sat together, drank ginger tea, stared at the sky, and heard waves hitting ship masts. No one thought about power. No one thought about seizure. There was only simple trade, short conversations, and mutual trust formed by hundreds of seasons. But the timeline always ran. It ran like a river never stopping. And like a river flowing from upstream to downstream without waiting, the world also moved. Far in the west, nations began to lock their gaze on spices. They began making bigger ships, more detailed maps, sharper ambitions. They began seeing the world not as a network of taste, but as a space needing to be owned. Spice aroma was no longer just a miracle. It became a reason. While the shadow approached, Nusantara kept walking in its own rhythm. In Banda Island, a child climbed a nutmeg tree, not knowing that the island would one day become one of the centers of world attention. In Ternate, a fisherman brought cloves home to be sun-dried with his family, not knowing that the trees behind his house would one day be witnesses to struggles between nations. In Aceh, a woman pounded ginger with her grandmother's old mortar, not knowing that the ginger she pounded was part of trade-penetrating deserts, rivers, and palaces. In Java, a healer put a cinnamon stick into boiling water, inhaled its aroma, and said softly to his student, "Everything has a home. And spices too. They always want to go home." His student did not understand the depth of those words. But the student nodded, because the cinnamon aroma rising to the air made him feel like he was hugging something very far, but very close. The outside world kept moving. But the Nusantara world remained silent in a different way. Silent not meaning not changing. Silent meaning accepting. Silent meaning understanding a bigger rhythm. And when finally the big European ships truly arrived, ships carrying cannons, maps, flags, and great ambitions, they did not see that peace. They did not see that simplicity. They only saw spices. Treasure. Wealth. Power. They did not see the soft land. Did not hear the wind. Did not feel the relationship between humans and nature. They only saw objects, not life. But before the ships arrived fully, before the world truly changed, before the spice route became a road of seizure, the Nusantara world still had last moments in long peaceful silence. At a twilight, when the sun set slowly behind green hills covered in mist, an old man sat on a stone at the water's edge. He was a sailor who had sailed the spice route since young. He stared at the horizon line turning gold, then red, then purple. He saw the future in that color. He saw a world that would be harder than the world he lived in. But he felt no fear. He was only sad slowly, sadness not piercing, soft sadness. He took a clove from his pocket, gripped it tightly in hand. He said very softly, almost like a prayer. This small fragrance has connected us all, but one day, it will also make us drift apart. The wind came and carried the clove aroma to the sea. The aroma floated slowly, far, very far. As if wanting to go to lands calling it for hundreds of years. But before going far, the aroma first returned to the beach, to the village, to small houses, to the kitchen, to the sleeping baby, to the cooking mother, to the farmer's hand harvesting spices, to trees growing in silence, to the soil supporting that fragrance from the beginning. And the soil said through the aroma, I am still here. Because even though the world changes, even though maps change, even though power changes hands, the land of Nusantara never changes in its heart. It remains the fragrant land. It remains the home of spices. It remains the guardian of aroma that cannot be owned by anyone. It remains the place where every journey begins and ends. And the spice route, even though later becoming a route full of battles, never lost its origin. It is a route born from soft wind, from small farmer hands, from simple kitchens, and from land asking for nothing. In the end, when all ships have gone, when history has written victory and loss, when the world has changed shape many times, the spice aroma still floats in the Nusantara air. Silent. Soft. Eternal. And inside that aroma, stored memories of the world before the world changed. About the flow of life never in a hurry. About the network of taste uniting humans before maps separated them. About the route built by wind, stars, and prayer. About a small house at the end of the world guarded by trees always fragrant. The route never extinguishes. It remains alive in the Nusantara wind. It remains alive in the sea delivering waves tirelessly. It remains alive in small hands harvesting spices. It remains alive in humans sleeping befriended by clove and nutmeg aroma. It remains alive in every breath of this land. And when the world sleeps, Nusantara still whispers softly through aroma. I am the home of that fragrance. And I will always be.